There was a reviewer after that May concert from Feast of Music. I had a quote about this piece that was probably my favorite quote I've ever gotten in a review, but it was, sounds like some sort of Hunter S. Thompson nightmare. That's, one of the best ways I could imagine this piece being described is that you're not you're not kind of in one world or another. You're somehow between worlds. You're somehow, between just dimensions and existences. You're between thoughts and you're between just all things. There's this like pivotal little point in which you're existing that anything at any point can become anything. So it's also along this sort of timeline. And I really, I, I hope that this piece continues to do that. And and I'll keep exploring that direction because I love that. I love that place. I love sitting in that place as a composer. That's my favorite place where things are not they're not one thing or another. They're undefinable and they're moving.
Hey everybody, we are Hypercube and we're here today to talk with our very own Erin Rogers about her piece Casino Remix, which is a part of our album Brain on Fire, which has just been released this past spring. So we have lots of questions for Erin, and this will be a different kind of interview because she's actually part of our group, so we'll be sort of conversing about the piece as well.
One of the things that is kind of cool about this piece, and I've noticed it in other pieces of yours, Aaron, where whatever the subject matter happens to be, in this case, it's the sounds of the casino, where you like incorporate some of the elements of like the sound world, into the music itself, right? So, there's sort of obvious cases where you're using like samples of actual casino sounds, um, but then there's also, the sort of imitation of those sounds within the instruments, right? At one point, I sort of mute the strings of the guitar and I make a sound. It's like shuffling the cards, and so there's like a incorporation of sound effects and like drawing from the sound world that you're writing about. So I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Sure, yeah. Um, yeah, Casino is a piece that actually I think of quite literally in a lot of ways, both in the mixing of the sounds, the sound worlds that come together, the types of sounds, the reference, I guess, that comes with the samples, the mimicry and blending that comes with the instruments, and then the idea that it all relates somehow to this large building that's a casino that I think probably most of us have been in or at least seen footage of a casino or had an experience, but it really fit things I was exploring with at the time. And this is about September 2018 when I started writing this piece. Full disclosure, I've spent many hours in casinos, partly because I was an avid poker player for a long time. And from the outdoor world, whatever that landscape is like, into this completely newly created world of sound and sight, lights, people, smells. It's this sort of ecosystem that exists purely for the purposes of the folks entering to gamble. And that sensory overload that occurs when you enter that it's a pretty smash you in the face kind of experience. And I wanted to create that at the beginning of this piece. And the way to do that, I guess, as I was breaking it down, matched and aligned really well with this the idea of having electronic sounds combined with acoustic sounds or physical sounds. And then, of course, sounds that take on a referential or jog certain obvious physical actions, like rustling of chips or, I guess, shuffling of cards, right? You've got this. And these are sounds that you might hear them and think that that's a very familiar sound. I have now an association of that sound with some physical act that's happening, but it is also a sound for the sake of sound and can be blended and can be manipulated or can be mimicked by an instrument. And as a listener walking through a casino, oftentimes you're hearing something and making attaching these sounds to different elements, making patterns of things, and they might or might not be real. So I wanted to play in that world where some of the sounds seem real, some don't, and they can all exist in this piece, this 7.5-minute piece, this sound world. But they also exist, I think, literally in a casino when you walk through. So That's part of the idea. The idea of the remix itself comes from that too, this sort of altering or contorting of this reality of different, different origins of sound, different methods of making sound, and twisting it, changing the idea of the shuffling of the cards is now a trigger for some other thing that is mimicked in the guitar right after it. So then it becomes, well, is it about the shuffling of the cards? Am I supposed to think about that? Well, no, this was also a gesture. So where do I exist in my sort of perceiving of this sound world as well? So a lot of the colors and ideas, because they double over not only as physical things that you might recognize or sounds that you could just you would think are very one thing or another. I want to play in the world where they are also musically something else, and that's part of what drives the piece forward. And then the other aspect of that is this sort of formal aspect. I think of this piece literally as a walk through a casino. So when you enter, as I said, you enter through these doors, you are hit with this waft of sound, smell, of lights, this overwhelmingness, and that we tried to achieve through just the massiveness of the opening section. And it's a combination of like very high pitched sounds that are sort of breaking their way through in the soprano and the keyboard. You've got the bass drum that's sort of punctuating these huge bass moments, and sort of creating a spaciousness or a size of what feels like a large room kind of feel. So I'm trying to capture that physical largeness with that. The guitar is moving in these glissando patterns that are moving up and down, that are sort of creating this like the sound of slot machines, or just many electric devices that are spewing off sound in all different ways. And then the sample track that I put underneath it is just another layer of like slap you in the face, so much sound. And that's very much what it's like to be walking through the slot area of a casino. There's just so much happening, and that's part of how they're designed, to be honest. That's how casinos are meant to sort of overwhelm and just take you into this world where you then don't have a lot of extra space for independent thought or whatnot. But that then moves into a next section that's smaller, and we start to get more into the smaller sound section. And it's again, a lot of these sort of physical samples. I'm at a blackjack table, I'm playing with chips here, I'm shuffling here, I hear some sort of metallic a resonance over here. And the second section plays with sort of the diving down, isolating into a small table game where that you've got physical actions, and you have just smaller one at a time items, or matching up for two things at once. And I think that gives a little bit of a break from this first sort of powerful, and it mimics a second room. I mean, I've gone through this first room, now I'm in the second room, maybe, or in my head, I've gone from this sort of overwhelmed space to now I've dialed down and I'm able to sort of make sense and hear some smaller sounds. And then, of course, the third section moves back into a fantasy-like section. I think of, if you've ever been to Las Vegas or some of these, or Macau, or some of these larger casino towns, they're not just gambling facilities, they're also resort facilities. So they have a swimming pool over here, sort of like exhibition areas, and large, just all under one roof entertainment for you, for your family. And what I think of in this third section is sort of like a fantasy-like atmosphere where if you're a child, and I remember I was playing poker in the poker room, and right across the room there was a banister, and on the other side of this like banister staircase area, nobody who was underage could cross into the gaming area. So everybody was over there who was a child or who was a teenager. And I remember looking over there thinking, wow, what would you do in a place like this if you were underage and weren't able to take part in the gaming? Well, they had a huge soda pop machine, and this little old cafe that had been made to look 50s, and then they had it was like this sort of exhibition area for people to play in, and this sort of music that was happening in this area that was very synthetic and designed to make people feel like they were in a some sort of fantasy land type of world, And that's one of the qualities of Section 3 and into Section 4 that I kind of think about in this piece. So that sort of, is that other aspect of casino living. And then the end of the piece is just right back formally recap to the beginning, because when you come in a door that enters straight into slots, you leave, and typically you're leaving through the slot area again. So it is, in a literal way, the trip around the casino. So yeah, that's part of the inspiration for the piece, the idea of remixing the piece, and a lot of the different sound worlds and how they blend together.
Yeah, it's so cool. I hadn't actually realized, how much of that had sort of structural basis of the piece. I definitely, now that you explain it, I can see it. It's all there. It's kind of a novel idea, actually. I mean, incorporating all of those elements as the sort of like fundamental or like a structural idea. And I'm just thinking of some of your other pieces, like you have Light on Light, which is sort of like this similar treatment, but all sort of based on train travel. And I wonder, like, is this like something that you're doing in most of your pieces, or is it sort of a newer idea that you've been using? Or
there is, some danger to being too on the nose, and so in Light on Light and in Casino, one of the most important things is to sort of keep it away from going into that zone and just becoming some sort of exact imitation of what you might hear. And I guess my goal is to achieve the walk back more so than the walk forward, because in Casino, starting with a very large, very involved sample track, and layering all these instruments on it, and then saying, okay, how do I shape this so that within this we've got triggers and interesting gestures, and then where do I go from there? Whereas other pieces I might start from very, very little, just have one guitar line, and then on top of that put a sax line, and then on top of that put a piano line, and build it up. So this is and Light on Light, both of those are examples of more either 50/50 or more of the deconstructing. With Light on Light, I started with a free improv track and basically did a transcription of myself playing, transcribed that, took what I wanted, ditched what I didn't, and then applied a whole bunch of percussion writing to it, and applied measures, applied all of the sort of like notational devices that then I could play with an ensemble and make it work. And I learned my part. Like, I learned the free improv transcription of the free improv. I then had to learn that in order to make that piece work. And what it did is it's just expanded some of my notational ideas that I probably wouldn't have come up with if I had just started from a piece of staff paper and what I thought I might be able to do. This was sort of the reverse engineering of that. So yeah, Casino is more in that realm for sure, because it does have this sort of the first opening part, especially, this sort of throw everything on a canvas and then organize, and don't organize too much, rather than the building up. And I think that if I had tried to build up a piece like this from ground zero, it could have resulted in being too on the nose.
Yeah, absolutely. The beginning of the piece is, I like how you were talking about the visual element in the beginning of the piece and how you feel like you're in a room, although you don't really know what's going on in that room, because it's, as you say, it's not a sound that's exactly what you're going to hear in a casino, although sometimes you're going to hear fragments of it. It's like deconstructed and then reconstructed in a hypercube sort of way. And one thing I think that adds to the beginning of this piece is your use of the synthesizer. Instead of a piano or accordion, for me, you choose to use synthesizer, which is really awesome, and I think really suits the piece well, because you get this really sparkly high register of the piano that matches perfectly with the soprano sax and the percussion and the guitar at the beginning of the piece, and it just highlights that atmosphere that you're going for. So I wonder maybe if we could hear a little bit of the beginning before we go on. great. There's just so much happening in there. It's just so much fun to play, and it's the sound that results from it. It's like, well, five different instruments because you get the samples and you get the four of us playing at the same time, so you get this big mass of awesome sound sparkling. So I wanted to ask Chris maybe about your experience with the percussion in Erin's piece. Can you talk a little bit about what you use in this piece and how the percussion part is written?
Yeah, yeah, totally. So obviously you guys heard the bass drum, and there's like an high octave set of crotales in there, and then there's like a range of like metal type objects, randomly picked. And then there are some like wooden objects like wood blocks, and then like this like special small like thin wooden box that Erin wanted to use. That kind of leads to my question to Erin. You had like such a strong sense of the macro and the micro composition of the piece, but the percussion part, you really only had a few instruments like written into the part, like the bass drum and the crotales were like the main two, and then suspended cymbal as another instrument. Is there a reason why you decided to do it that way, or is that just something that you've experienced when you've been writing other pieces that involve percussion, like you sort of have like a little bit of an open door for the performer to experiment with?
Yeah, no, it's true. This piece, I mean, like compositionally, the bass drum and crotales just made a lot of sense, matching, blending. But honestly, I didn't know what was going to make sense with the sounds in the second section, and that's mainly where I wanted to workshop with you. And I feel like as an ensemble, we spent a lot of time writing the piece ourselves. I mean, I remember meeting with Jay for hours, working through the Eventide, the H9, and pedal and the distortion, and even after the first few performances, there were still questions. Okay, well, do you want distortion here? How, and really, I feel like that kind of flexibility with the guitar part was also, I wanted it to be there with the percussion too. I mean, there were sounds I wasn't sure. I didn't know what would sound really great with the guitar, with the multiphonic and the sax, and this patch and the keyboard. So having an open, open discussion with you knowing the percussion sounds really well, and also you having a variety of instruments that you'd either played before or had an instinct that's that would work. These might be sounds you could, and you just have more stuff than me. So I really just wanted to get in a room with all of these sounds that we figured out on guitar and in the keyboard patch, and hear what some of those instruments you brought in might how they might sound. And I know we went back and forth on some of them, and some of them had sort of delayed reactions. Just some of them were rattling too much. Like there were different qualities that either qualified or disqualified them. But the process was the same. Mostly for that second section. Yeah, the opening movement with the bass drum and the crotales was simply blend and cut. So, and that's one thing in this piece that really was a limiting factor with the orchestration, and that was that some of the instruments were electric, and basically like volume was determined by either a volume pedal or a knob, and in other cases we were just straight up acoustic. The soprano saxophone and the percussion are all acoustic, so the loud sounds on the percussion were to cut. I mean, the high sounds were to cut. The soprano sax in the opening section, it's up in the high register to cut. So so that middle section was really the only one where I was unclear, and it was more based around small qualities of sound and blend.
Yeah, there was like a certain amount of like work required to like kind of match the textures of the other instruments, especially the synthesizer. That's sort of like can be like a little bit unpredictable because there's so many options, and that we don't often use it. It's like a synthesizer when we perform. So yeah, it's pretty cool. And plus, like the instruments that are like made out of like different types of metal, they're the most unpredictable in a lot of ways. They're not like necessarily manufactured stock instruments that you can just buy, like every little piece of metal plate or bolt or whatever is a little bit different.
Yeah.
It's also funny, I forgot to mention there's the ratchet, and the ratchet is probably the instrument that of all the percussion instruments reminds you the most of the casino because of the slot machines. You know, that the ratchet sound really matches that, like when the coins come out of the slot machine, if somebody wins or something. I mean, that's like a real immediate, like, oh yeah, I could like make that connection right there. All the other instruments are a little bit more timbral, I think, in like matching what's happening with the other instruments in the ensemble. So yeah, that's pretty cool though. It's a lot of fun.
I just asked, were some of those actually found objects, or were they built to be instruments, or did you just find
Oh no,
them?
some of them were just like random, like left over from like a construction project or something like that. You know, that I had like picked up somewhere at one point. Um, so when we did the recording, like that was all like my personal stuff that I kind of had collected. But like so, some of those instruments, though, like I don't think we when we traveled to play the piece, like we could take them on the plane, like certain types of metals and stuff like that, where they were just like too heavy. So that's when I would just, you know, when we were at Cal Arts, I just went in the percussion studio and found what they had lying around and things like that. So um, but I mean, I guess the only thing that would be of sort of a continue of a pattern, like a steady pattern, is that they couldn't be too large, right? They all had to fit on that trap table that I had to play on. So, you know, we were sort of restricted by the size of them.
Absolutely. Maybe we could hear a little bit of the section in which Chris uses all those different metallic sounds. Yeah, you absolutely hear all the colors in Chris's setup there, and we're all contributing to the little hits that are going on and little differences in color and sound. So that brings me to another question, and maybe it's more of a compliment to you, Erin, than a question because when we finally got together after all of the individual workshopping with, I know you said you workshop with Jay a lot on his sounds, and you got to know the synthesizer well, and you thought a lot about the percussion and what you would want. But when you finally notated the piece for us to play, it came together so quickly, and I think it's it's because of the way that you notated the piece. It's just so incredibly clear what you wanted. And it just, for us, it just all came together. And it doesn't sound like a piece that would come together quickly. It sounds like a lot of different complicated elements that are happening. But for us, it's just amazing how quick it came together. I don't know. It was just really, it just worked out organically once we started to put it together. And that I'm sure comes partly from you being part of the ensemble and also from your experience as a composer. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I mean, especially in a workshopping kind of section, what you're setting, you want it to be as, as approachable as possible, and to be as, simple as possible. I, and that comes down like what's needed in the piece, right? In order to make it a big piece. There was already so much going on in this piece. I didn't have this idea that I, wanted to create a lot of extra roadblocks or challenges. It actually, most of it sits in 4/4, or at least notated in 4/4, which as a player is a lot easier to play around. And because there wasn't, I mean, there's only a few sections where we are dealing with some sort of compound meter or places where, and I know I know what we do well, having played together for I guess at least 6-7 years now, but the those moments you make decisions as to how you're going to break up the meter, how you're going to sort of make things pure, and having just so much experience, like you say, with our group, you know how to make it easy and you know how to make it challenging, and that's it doesn't need, not every piece needs to be challenging in every way, and this piece was already set to be challenging sonically. balance wise with the multiple different elements. It wasn't. I mean, we've definitely played pieces that are more extremely challenging in those ways of just being outside of our comfort zone. I mean, Andrea, you were changing patches on a synthesizer and playing on a keyboard. I mean, already you're way out of your, it's a far walk from the piano to that. Although there's mapping that is consistent. I'm playing with my foot. I'm triggering samples, but I'm also trying to play over top of a texture that's going to be very loud. Chris is trying to cut through with these acoustic instruments through a very, very thick electric texture. And Jay's creating this texture and trying to balance all of these elements, all these pedal changes, all these elements. I just felt like there were already a lot of challenges, and the piece was already being expressed. So, and yeah, they're just things that are idiomatic over the years playing together, just things that I think I wanted to try because we've done them before or almost done them, and I thought, well, let's throw them in this piece. This would be cool here. This would be a neat sound. But their sounds, a lot of it's chicken and egg. It's come from the group playing together and hearing these things already. So that means we've done them already. That means we're already familiar. And so the piece itself is full of familiar things, even if the sum of all parts is not something that we've, heard verbatim before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're so excited that you decided to write this piece for us, and whenever we play it for an audience, they always marvel at the different kinds of sounds that are being produced in the piece and how it just works organically as a group. It's just a wonderful piece that we'll continue to play lots. We can hear one more clip from somewhere near the end of the piece. So we can hear a few different colors that are evident in the piece. That's maybe my favorite part.
Yeah, so good.
I love when those low E's in the synthesizer come in, add that bass, and they just grow.
Oh yeah, no, I was just gonna say that's sort of like that the bass kind of comes wafting in, so you again get a sense of the largeness of the room, and yeah, the synth patches on there. I imagine, Andrea, I know there were some things in playing this instrument that were unique, and one in this section was that you were accumulating pitch, which is sort of the antithesis of what you would do on the piano, but just gradually adding more pitches in order to create a larger and thicker like drone texture, really. So
It was super fun to have that new challenge. I hadn't had that in a piece before, so thank you for writing it in. Yeah, I would just control the volume and add pitches, first of all with my fingers, and then start to use my palm because they were clusters of sound, and then be controlling the volume with my other hand. And well, at one point I was using two hands to get a big cluster of sound, and I would just gradually release some pitches afterwards and then gradually lower the volume. It was, yeah, there's a lot of mechanics going on in there actually.
I remember, I guess you had that idea, like, we're going to make this, what's like the biggest, sort of dirtiest sound that we can get? And we went through some different options, like, heavy distortion, but even still, like, heavy distortion, it doesn't have like the cluster thing. And actually, like, making clusters on guitar is not the easiest thing. So, the H9 harmonizer, like if you're adding a half step below and a whole step above, and then playing all 6 strings, you're getting, what is that, like, 18 notes exactly at every moment, and then sliding and then doing like a gradual gliss with the slide at the same time. So it's almost like it's like that Beatles chromatic string swell where and everything is just sort of like clusters all along, so you get this massive sound. Yeah, I kind of remember like, well, we could try this, and the minute I hit it, you're like, yeah, that's what I want. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, any composer who hasn't written for electric guitar yet, I mean, it's like the candy jar. I mean, it's just everything there, and the H9, that pedal in particular, it has like a multitude of functions that are not. It's not just a harmonizer. You can program in all sorts of different points, sort of like the Swiss Army knife of pedals, as I understand.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. If there's any sort of pedal out there that does more things that no other pedal does, that's the one. And yeah, it's kind of like you said, the Swiss Army knife, candy jar pedal. And then the other thing that you did with the guitar part, which I thought was really great, was you used the slide, but you didn't use it in like, well, in the beginning it's sort of like in a typical slide kind of technique, but we were also doing stuff where we were like sort of percussively attacking the strings, and a lot of the stuff, it sort of sounds keyboardy in a way, like these really high sort of punchy beep bop boop boop, those effects. And then there's another section where it's like these very high pitches, like way off the fretboard of the guitar, way up over the frets, that are like matching with some of the crotales that are like in the stratosphere, high pitched. And so you sort of took the electric guitar and you expanded the palette like in all these different ways. There's not a ton of like traditional guitar playing on it.
Yeah, and we line up in a different formation with this piece. It's not our typical cube formation, so it makes sense. I think the last thing I would say about the piece is just when we perform it live, we are in the sort of, I guess, wide horseshoe. This is sort of half circle formation, and one thing I really like to maintain, which sounds great, is having an amp for Andrea's keyboard synth, which localizes that sound. I mean, and then Jay's electric guitar setup is also a localized amplified sound, directional, and that really creates the idea of an ensemble, especially with Chris and I. I guess I'm on the one far side, and Chris is sort of in the center back, as being the two acoustic instruments. And when we do that, what we have is still this sort of ensemble feel and directionality of sound within the ensemble. I guess the other option is to have Andrea's keyboard or Jay's amp go also into the house, but I wanted to leave the house. In general, I like to leave the house open just to the sampled sounds, so that you get this sort of sample bath that might be, another kind of directional feel, and another larger force, which just adds to that sort of depth and mix when you're playing live.
So without further ado, if you haven't gotten our album yet, please go to Bandcamp and you can hear Erin's piece, Casino Remix, as well as 4 other pieces that we recorded and we're super proud of. It's on our album Brain on Fire. Wherever you can buy CDs or go to Bandcamp to get the download. And it's on New Focus Recordings. Shout out to New Focus Recordings for helping us put all this together. So thank you, Erin, for talking about your music today. We're so happy to have you have written this piece for us, and we're going to continue to play it when concerts start again.
Yes, may that be soon. Thanks, everyone.